Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food in whatever space you have available. And I do this by sharing exactly what I've been up to in my own allotment, my own kitchen garden here in Littlehampton on the south coast of the UK. Now, coming up this week, we have been checking over our fruit and vegetable stores to make sure we have got no spoilage in the kitchen garden. Added to that, down on the allotment, we have also started making a new compost bin with a lot that follows on from that. And back in the potting shed, it's time to do our annual check over of our seed collection. So without much ado, let's get into it. Well, I'm sat here in my kitchen garden here at home at the moment. There's so much wildlife in sense of birds and things going on around me. It's really quite lovely. Certainly is a sign that autumn is well upon us now, and I'm looking around and we're certainly seeing a lot of signs of autumn. However, with autumn comes the chance now that we've got to keep on top of checking over our fruit and vegetables that we have in store. This is something that I try and check quite regularly. So mostly these are ones that aren't in the freezer. These are fruit and vegetables that I've stored in crates or in boxes inside my garage. Now I choose my garage because it's somewhere cool, dry and dark. It works very, very well, I've got to say. And in there I just have these crates where I have apples all placed into the crate, but I've tried to give them a bit of airflow, a bit of space around each apple to make sure they're not touching. But they still do need regular checking. And the reason that I check them quite regularly is, of course, we want to remove any vegetables that are spoiling, any vegetables that are starting to rot. Reason for that is, quite obviously, when they start to rot, they will soon spread that rot onto some of our other vegetables. So it's far better to get those vegetables out as soon as we see them. Now this is quite easy, quite quick to do with my apples and pears because they're in crates. I can quickly look at them and take action as soon as. Onions, it's a bit different. I keep them in sacks, so I have to empty the sacks and go through each one, just giving them a little touch, a little squeeze to make sure they're not feeling soft. If they feel soft, they go in the compost bin. And then my things like my carrots and my beetroot, which I've stored in damp sand, that's a case of having to empty those and go through them just to make sure. A little bit harder doing the root crops, to be honest with you, but it is what we have to do. It's a very important step in order to maintain our fruit and vegetables. Now outside, the chickens that are now all as part of one flock, they have certainly integrated themselves really well. The two new chickens that basically we got about 3 weeks ago, we popped them together last week. They have started all sleeping in the same coop, so they're definitely getting on. Not laying eggs yet, but all 5 of the chickens are together now and looking after each other and acting like they should as part of a flock, so looking after things. Brings me up, I do need to go through the chicken coop very, very soon, give it a good wash out, but also move the chicken coop over slightly to give me a bit more room behind the chicken coop. Part of the changes I'm hoping to make in the garden over the winter months. Now, another thing that I have been doing is just trying to make sure that I've got somewhere to put some of my tender plants. These are my plants that generally I keep in pots that I need to move indoors over the winter months. My peach tree is a great example. I move that into the greenhouse over winter from November to about May to avoid peach leaf curl. My lemon tree, that also goes into the greenhouse. My less hardy grapevine that is in a pot, that also goes in the greenhouse. And this is all to get it through the winter so it doesn't have a difficult time getting through the winter if it does get too cold. Now this is something we do have to keep an eye on. It's always worth keeping an eye on the weather, because if a cold snap is going to come, we either need to make sure that our plants are protected already, or we need to pot out a load of fleece. Now, fleece is something I keep in the shed, and I've spoken about this before, but it's something always worth just keeping to hand, and then you can drape it over your plants should the weather suddenly change for the worst. It just offers a bit of protection for our plants. Most gardeners will keep this to hand. Luckily, I'm fairly sheltered here on the south coast. I'm fairly lucky that we can get away with it. At the moment, I'm looking out and we're still getting courgettes, so we are doing okay. Now, I mentioned my grapevine in that little bit, and I actually have 2 grapevines. One that is in a pot because that doesn't tend to last very well in winter, but I've also got one in the ground in my arbour, and that has produced a mass amount of grapes this year, and I've harvested those this weekend as well, just making sure that they're not going to the waste. Now, I do like grapes. I eat grapes pretty much every day, and these grapes are absolutely delicious. These are a dessert variety of grape, because there's 2 varieties of grape. You've got your dessert variety or your wine making variety. Now, I don't generally drink alcohol, so I don't go for the wine making type, but certainly the dessert, the eating type, we have grown that, and they are absolutely delicious. I have to admit, not very big grapes. I didn't thin them out enough to really produce the big grapes, but the grapes that we have got, absolutely magnificent. And it took quite a while harvesting them all, but it was worth it nonetheless. Good amount of grapes, good amount of other vegetables. Now, we have also been harvesting a few more vegetables. The harvests with the beetroot and the cabbage and things like that continue, but more importantly, things like spinach and mustard, our leafy greens, we are still harvesting a lot of those, which is really good and very, very important for these colder months. It's nice to get that fresh, healthy greens in us. Something that I talk about a lot, something that I try and promote, is that we're able to eat healthy greens all year round. However, the pumpkins have came to an end. We've harvested all our pumpkins, all our winter squash, and they have came to an end. They're also going into our stores in the garage. It's been a good year for those. It was difficult to get them going because of how dry it is, but we have had a good amount of pumpkins, butternut squash, all those sort of winter squashes that have gone into the store. And I don't grow pumpkins for Halloween. I grow them to eat, so I'm very, very happy with that. It is about the time. I'm sure many of us are now looking at our pumpkins and harvesting them ready to carve for Halloween. If that's what you want to do, absolutely fine, of course. It's just not what I do. However, getting our pumpkins into store is always a bit of a challenge. I always wait for the stalk to turn brown. When that stalk turns brown, I cut it away from the plant, leaving as much of that stalk on as I possibly can. I give the skin a good wipe around, place it in my greenhouse for a week just to harden the skin a little bit more, and then it goes into the greenhouse. And that should be good enough to store right through the winter. So all in all, it has been another very productive and good week. It is becoming a little bit harder to work in the garden because the mornings are darker, the evenings are darker, but I think we can just about cope with what we're doing. Right, I am going to head down to the allotment now. In the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week. Well, it's that part of the podcast where I just interrupt you and ask if you would be good enough to rate and review this podcast on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us. It helps us get found by more people who might also be interested in learning more about how to grow their own food. But not only that, we also run the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club, which helps keep this podcast running. For just £5 a month we charge to be a member, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts that give you a bit of an idea what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. But also added to that, you also get a monthly seed pack, which within that seed pack you get a collection of seeds that can be sown in that very month, you also get a copy of our mini newspaper, which also gives you a few instructions on how to grow those seeds, as well as a few things that you could do throughout that month. And all that is just £5 a month. Now, as an example, the seeds that we've sown over this last week have included spinach, which is always one that I like to grow pretty much all year round. And when we sow it correctly and sow it in the right way, we can almost have it growing all year round. And we've also sown some lettuce, another one that I like to eat all year round. Lettuce is a pretty much constant thing we have growing here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. Those leafy greens that keep us healthy. Something I've spoken about already in this podcast. Now, if that sounds like something you would be interested in joining up, then head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. We would love to have you there. Right, back to the gardening. Well, I'm down on the allotment now, and I've got to say, the road next to me is sounding a little bit noisy. I don't know if the microphone is going to pick up on that, but it is noisy. It is very, very noisy. Which is annoying, but it is the joys. I've got to admit, I've been down on the allotment quite early in the mornings over these last few weekends, and I quite enjoy it. But this weekend, there's a certain amount of greyness in the sky. It's certainly a bit on the dreary side. But it's not unpleasant. I quite like it, I have to say. The temperature's nice to work in. It's cool. It's just something really quite pleasant about it. It certainly does feel very autumnal. Now, I have been continuing to tidy this allotment up by starting in my bottom of my allotment and just working my way back. And I follow that routine every time I visit the allotment, starting in the same place and continually moving back. And because I visit this allotment every single day, it actually pays off. It doesn't take very long to get the allotment in some sort of decent order. We do still have weeds, of course. Weeds do build up, and the very top of the allotment is the worst area for it. But we have to take that sometimes. The rest of the allotment is looking reasonably okay. However, one of the big jobs that I have done this weekend was building a new compost bin. As you know, I believe that we need to produce and make more compost as much as we possibly can. And really, I want to get rid of the plastic Dalek compost bins that we have on the allotment. For me, they're ugly. They don't look the part. They do the job, but they're just ugly looking. Earlier this year, as you know, I took down one of my sheds in the garden, and part of that involved removing some corrugated iron. And that gave us 4 pieces of corrugated iron, which I've bolted together with some wooden posts in the corner to make a rectangular compost bin, about 1.5 metres long, 1 metre wide. So it's quite a large compost bin. But that's good. That is good. I do have one of these compost bins made out of corrugated iron on the top half of the allotment, and that has really paid off. We filled it up with compost. It's been paying off because we've managed to produce good compost from it, and all I have to do is just fill it up with compost material, maybe mix it up every now and then, but on a whole I just leave it to do its own thing. So having another compost bin is going to pay off. As I said, I want to get rid of the Dalek compost bins, so this one is going to pay off. And I've placed it at the bottom of the allotment, right where I generally enter the allotment. But it's also next to one of my other compost bins that I made out of some old fridge doors. That does still seem to be working. I'm going to keep hold of that for a little bit longer, but it seems to be working quite well. So with this new compost bin built, it meant I needed to start filling it up with some more compost material. Luckily, the grass here has dried out enough that I could cut the grass on quite a high cut. So with fully charged batteries, I came down and got my strimmer out, trimmed the grass down, and then run over with the lawnmower. Collected all those grass clippings, they've gone into the compost bin and starting to add, and just starting to tidy up the allotment. It's looking good, I have to say. I do feel the allotment is certainly coming together. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong. One of the other big jobs that I've done this weekend is planting out my overwintered onions. This is something that I try and do every year. I've grown some from seed and I've grown some from sets, and I've just got my sets in this weekend. Just simply digging a hole about 5 centimetres deep and dropping a set in, backfilling, watering and leaving it to do its own thing, repeating until all the onions were used up. It's one of those mind-numbing jobs that I really don't entirely enjoy, but once it's done, and they will grow over winter and provide us with some early onions next year. Now, I have to admit, these onions, because they are grown from sets, they're already a year old, so they have a tendency to bolt more next year, which is why I feel it is so good to also grow some from seed, because they are less likely to bolt. But we will also grow some spring sown ones as well. So Christmas we'll sow some seeds, and maybe again in April. And again, we can get sets that we plant those out in another bed. For me, it's just about having something growing in the allotment over winter that makes the allotment look like it's doing something. But it also just provides us with a longer period of harvesting certain crops, such as onions. And we do eat a lot of onions in our household. I think most households will eat a lot of onions, to be honest, because they are pretty much in every recipe. Now, talking of something that we do eat a lot of, the other thing we eat a lot of is tomatoes. And I've still got tomatoes growing outside that still seem to be producing, especially my small tomatoes. We're still getting some of these smaller tomatoes from them that are still just about turning red. They're still ripening. A couple of weeks ago I mentioned that I got a really large variety, a beefsteak variety of tomatoes that seem to be struggling to turn red. Well, they've started turning red now. Unfortunately, I've noticed that plant has got blight on it, which I'm not really that surprised about. Blight is a horrible fungal disease that does come around quite often, and it can devastate entire crops. So it's a really nasty one. It's one that as soon as we see it, we've got to take action. And as soon as I see it, what I had to do at this time of year, I basically picked all the tomatoes, green or red. We'll ripen those off at home by putting them in a drawer with a banana or something, and they'll just ripen. But the rest of the plant had to be removed and composted. Now, I say composting because really you should burn blighted stems, but we're not allowed fires here on the allotment, so I compost them as my only way of disposing of it, short of taking it to a communal dump. But unfortunately, that's not so easy to do, and by the time I get there, it's going to be stinking to high heaven. So I've just got it in the compost bin. I'll probably leave it in there for a couple of years to really rot down, but we just got to try and encourage our compost to really, really get nice and hot in order to kill off any of these blight spores. I'm not saying it's perfect, of course. It can still be a bit of a problem. Now, in terms of harvests, we have continued to harvest more apples and pears. I think the apples are now finished. We've harvested all the apples, but we've still got a lot of pears that aren't coming off the tree just yet. So we've done really, really well, particularly with apples and pears this year. Of course, we've continued to get things like chilies, tomatoes, aubergines, peppers, all those summer salad crops that I'm still thinking, when are they going to die? When are they going to stop producing? This year seems to be going on and on. I'm not complaining, of course, because we're still getting these crops come in. And of course, we're starting to harvest some of our autumn crops as well, including our broccoli, our cabbages and our cauliflowers, all of which we have harvested. I even harvested some young carrots that I put in quite late just to fill up some spaces in a bed, and I was just thinning those out, and the thinnings were large enough for us to eat. They may be small, but they will still taste just as good. So that is the latest from the allotment this week. Lots going on. Let me know what's going on in your allotment and what you're doing at the moment. I'm going to head on home and I will meet you back in the podding shed. But in the meantime, let's find out what we've got as our recipe of the week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef's got with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Well, this week I've got a delicious recipe. It's one that I've made over the weekend as a way to use up some of the last of this season's harvest. Those aubergines, peppers, chilies, onions and garlic, they have all been used in this recipe. But the great thing about this is it's a perfectly versatile recipe. It's one that you could adapt to your own needs. This is one of my go-to dishes as well. It's one that I make several times throughout the year. I make a big batch of it to keep in the freezer. It goes well with pasta. It goes as a side dish with a roast dinner. You could even put it on toast with a poached egg for lunch. So what is it? It is autumn ratatouille using homegrown vegetables. Absolutely delicious. You will find the recipe on our website at veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. But how I made it was I chopped up 1 onion and crushed 3 cloves of garlic. I placed the onions and the garlic into a pan with a drizzle of olive oil over a medium heat on the hob and just gently cooked those until they were nice and soft and translucent. Stirring occasionally. We don't want them to burn, just cook very, very gently. At this stage, I then added in 1 chopped aubergine, 2 chopped sweet peppers, 2 chopped courgettes, and a chopped chili. Now, the vegetables that I've used in this are completely versatile. You could use anything else that you may have. Maybe pumpkin, maybe marrow. Experiment. Try different things. But I just cooked these in that olive oil for about 5 to 10 minutes, stirring occasionally, just waiting to get those vegetables nice and soft and just take on some of that colour. Then we added in some tomatoes. I grabbed 8 fairly large tomatoes from my greenhouse. I chopped those up and added it to the pan. But you could, of course, use a can of chopped tomatoes. Also added in some thyme, which also came from my garden, and a bit of salt and pepper, and a splash of water just to get things started. I then reduced that heat down to a low heat and just simmered with a lid on for about 20 to 25 minutes. And this meant that all those tomatoes turned into a nice thick sauce. Those vegetables were nice and tender, and we have our dish. Really, really easy. You can finish it off with some nice chopped herbs just to add another element to it as well. Maybe some parsley or something. Really easy to make this dish, and it's so simple. Give it a go. Use up some of those last courgettes, or if you've had a glut of courgettes, it's a good way to use them up. Go give it a try and let me know how you get on. Well, I'm here in my podding shed now, and one of the things that I have also been doing this week is going through my collection of seeds. I have to admit, I have a really large collection of seeds that seems to grow and grow every year, despite me annually going through every single seed and trying to reduce the amount that I have. Now, I have organised my seeds in such a way that I can only spend sort of 15-20 minutes every night going through each box. But my seeds are organised that each box tallies up with a certain family of seeds. So green manures would be in one box, microgreens would be in another box might contain seeds like beans and peas, and so on. Usually I keep these seeds inside my fridge that is also found inside my shed. Now, this fridge isn't a running fridge. It's purely there to use the shelves as storage. And the reason I choose that is because it's somewhere dry. It's somewhere that the insulation helps keep the temperature fairly consistent, but it's also less likely that rats and mice are going to get into that fridge and get my seeds. I do tend to add a few packets of silica gel, those little packets that you often find inside electrical goods that say do not eat on them. I often throw those in with my boxes and inside the fridge as well. This just helps absorb any moisture that is in the air, because moisture is one of the biggest killers when it comes to seeds. Anyway, yes, I do go through all my seeds every winter, and what I like to do is, as I go through each box, I remove any seeds that are out of date. Now, you might be thinking that seems very wasteful, and you would be correct. But I do find that when seeds go out of date, yes, they often do germinate, but the germination rates are a lot lower than what we would normally expect. So is it worth the risk? I particularly find with things like carrots and onions that they very rarely germinate when they're more than a year old. So sometimes I find it's a bit of a waste of time trying to germinate seeds that are out of date. That being said, they do sometimes germinate, and more often than not, they do. Generally, those dates that the seed company puts on those packets is to sort of control their quality control a bit. They find that after a certain date, in certain conditions, that the germination rate, instead of being what they would call acceptable, say 90 to 100% germination rate, it might be down at 60%, and they find that that's just not good enough. So to avoid getting complaints from customers, they add this out of date date to the packets to try and avoid complaints. Like I said, they can still germinate after that date, and it's certainly worth a try. But because I have so many seeds, I find this out of date limit to be a good cutoff to remove those seeds from my collection. And now what I generally do is I donate them to some local charities. They generally tend to eat them up, especially the gardening charities. As I said, they make use of them no matter what, and they're just grateful for any seeds that they have. The other thing we could, of course, do with them is feed the birds, because they love seeds. So lots of options with what to do with out-of-date seeds. It doesn't mean they get wasted. It just means that it frees up space inside my boxes to enable me to be more efficient and quicker when it comes to gardening. Now, the other thing that I do tend to do is make a list of what seeds I have in those boxes. And I find this very, very useful at this time of year because we are planning what we're going to be growing next year. And this often means pouring through seed catalogues and seeing if there's anything new. But it also means that we need to work out what varieties and what type of vegetables we want to grow next year. If I've got a list of what I've already got to hand, it means I'm not going to order more of the same, which means I'm less wasteful and I save money. So again, just having this list on a spreadsheet or on a bit of paper works well for a wide variety of reasons. Now, something else I like to do is when we open seed packets up, generally speaking, we rip them open and they're designed in a way that they can't be used again, which is really annoying. I think it's really annoying because I feel that sometimes what happens is the seed packet inside the box that I keep them in goes in the wrong way. The seeds fall out of the packet. You can simply, of course, just fold the packet over so they can't come out. But I also like to put them inside baggies, just to Ziploc baggies, just to add another layer of security. So I'm not mixing up all my seeds. Now, this is the thing that I am setting for you this week, is to go through your seed collection, work out what you've got and what you're going to need to order in. And that means, let's say you go through my affiliate link with Premier Seeds Direct, for example, which I highly recommend you do because they are very reasonably priced seeds and you get a lot for your money. But instead of having several deliveries throughout the year, paying delivery charges every time, you can get just the one delivery charge by ordering it all in one go. Now, of course, I urge you to use the Premier Seeds affiliate link that I have because it does give me a little bit of commission, but ultimately you may have your own favourite supplier that you want to use as well, whatever suits you. So that is your homework. Go and make a list of what seeds you have and what you need to order in. But that brings us up to the end of this week's podcast. Hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, then please do leave us a rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds to leave a rate and review, but it means the world to us. We've actually had a review come in from Lynn on Spotify, and she says, "Hi Richard, snap gardening is a brilliant way to describe your gardening approach. I'll remember that. My plans for next year are to try straw bales. I've got some areas on the plot that would be easier to make productive by just putting straw bales on the ground, and also provide a useful physical boundary to my neighbour's plot. I'll keep you posted, Lynn." I will be doing a podcast to cover how we did the straw bale gardening, as well as how well it works, so keep your eyes out for that. But snap gardening is the acronym that I created. SNAP, of course, standing for simple, natural and productive, which is very much the way that I'm going through with my gardening method, which is another reason to get rid of seeds that are out of date, because that is a simple approach to keep them organised. If you've enjoyed this podcast, want to help support the work that we do, please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Details on that on our website, theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. If you want to get in touch, my email address is richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. You can also contact us through the website. You can leave a comment on the bottom of a blog post, or you can leave us a voicemail. We do love having voicemails because we love other voices on this podcast. Finally, don't forget to find me on social media. Give us a follow, give us a subscribe, and all that jazz. Well, that is it for this week. We will be back again next time, so until then, please take care.